We're going to talk about successes and challenges. I kind of adjusted this talk as I went along, preparing it after I came up with this great title. So we're not going to hit a lot of challenges because I feel like I'm talking to the choir, and we did that with 3 or 4 different workshops, and we probably all know the barriers and the obstacles. We'll touch on them real quickly. And see how it goes. And I'm going to focus on North Carolina, but I think for everyone east of the Mississippi, you'll see a lot of similarities for your state. All right, so as I was going through as I was listening to a lot of the presentations yesterday, I couldn't help but think, ditto. I got that point in mind too. So I apologize if I'm redundant, and this is the first redundant. David Schnocky had this up in his talk. So this is the decline in North Carolina from 1990 and updated through 2013. So that's a little new part from what David's talk was. But what alerted North Carolina was about 2002 data, where we saw this huge decline in numbers of shortleaf. And we're looking at about a 62% decline in area, 47% decline in basal area. So that raised some red flags, and one of my colleagues pointed out to me, because North Carolina was deep in a longleaf initiative at that time, he says, if we ignore it, shortleaf is going to be the next initiative we need to worry about because of decline. We even had a grad student did a quick analysis on it, and at this decline rate, North Carolina would have ran out of shortleaf in 2023. Obviously, that didn't happen because you can see from the 2007 to the 2013 data, we see a little bit of leveling off. And so that's good news. And we'll take credit that our shortleaf emphasis over the years is actually working. So that was one good news. We saw a decline. That started our interest in shortleaf. The other thing that was a little disturbing about the FIA data back then was this trend, and David pointed this out too, so I'm not going to hit it much harder. But 75% of our shortleaf is greater than 40 years old. So over the years from 1990 through 2007, we've moved into an older class. So just keep that in mind. We don't have a lot of regeneration for the next forest, and that was a concern to us in North Carolina. This is our FIA data, kind of like what Jim pointed out in his. Most of our shortleaf is in, and it's something like 75% is in the Piedmont of North Carolina. The other high percent is in our foothills and lower elevations of the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina. But we have some pretty strong evidence that there was a fair component in our coastal plain, the Atlantic coastal plain, but it had been logged out years and years ago, and it's got some other challenges that may or may not be a good area to focus our initiative on. So for right now, we think the best area to focus on is Piedmont, Appalachians, where we have the greatest numbers. So we realized we had a problem. We decided to make an effort to make more people aware of that. For years, I called it the Shortleaf Emphasis instead of the Shortleaf Initiative because I wasn't sure I wanted to get involved in another initiative. And there's a lot of unique challenges to shortleaf that we don't share with some of it in North Carolina. But the first conference we had was in June of 2005 with the SAF meeting group. And there was a lot of interest. We had a large crowd. And since that time, we've had 5 total. In spite of what I said, 4 total. I added the 5th one at the last moment, forgot to change that. The one that I highlighted is the one that Mike referred to as the Shortleaf Conference in Raleigh. And that was what we considered more of a region-wide outreach to people. We feel pretty proud that initiative was in Raleigh and that we helped to get it started because as Mike said, that kind of gave birth to the rest of the initiative, and things really have accelerated since that time. Because we didn't do a whole lot from 2005 to 2006. I did a little bit, and I had requests for 7 presentations at different meetings and workshops, specifically on shortleaf. And I want to point it out, it was a mixed group. It was consulting foresters, landowners, the Forest Guild, the Fire Council, our own agency, service forester meetings. So there was a not just one group or one individual. There was a whole lot of interest in shortleaf. And I think it also outlined that there was a lack of experience and just general knowledge of shortleaf. So we had over those years since 2005, we've had a pretty good outreach effort. And I think that has worked. We see the interest is now, and with the initiative on the region-wide effort, we've seen an increase in acres planted. I throw out this great figure. We've had a 400% increase in acres planted. Wow. That's really good. But for about 10 years, our average of shortleaf acres planted was about 105. And I think this last year we've increased up to 450 to 500. That's pretty much across the state. I'm sure I missed some acres, but it just emphasizes that compared to longleaf pine even, which is still a small amount of acres. I think we did 5,000 a year, 5,400 acres a year. Compared to loblolly, I'm not even sure we register a percent of the total scale. But with that has been an increase in seedling demand, and if you don't have a market, they don't grow the trees, or you don't sell the seedling. So that's a good sign. Increases in acres burned, so we've all heard the message that shortleaf needs fire, and North Carolina's responding. We've seen an increase of acres burned for shortleaf, and we've done a priority in cost share funding, so we consider that a success. NRCS has listed it in their EQIP programs and some of their other cost share programs as a priority species along with longleaf. Our own state cost share, we recognize shortleaf with a 60% cost share, opposed to some loblolly pine. We're only at 40%. Longleaf we also have at 60%. We've had a renewed interest in tree improvement, and I list this as a great success in North Carolina. Robin mentioned it in her talk yesterday, so there's another one of those dittos. Our orchard was old and riddled with pitch canker, and also was acquired by the city as a desirable place to put soccer fields. So we basically lost our orchard and had to start over from the beginning. We took advantage of 25 to 30-year-old U.S. Forest Service progeny tests in North Carolina, and we're able to remeasure them, and we got some really great data that you don't usually get. You don't usually go back and measure progeny tests at 25 and 30 years. So they've been measured at 5 years, they've been measured at 10 years. We came back and remeasured them, and we got some real good information from that, and also some sign material to put into our new second generation orchards. And just real quick, the best growers were the best growers on all sites. So that's kind of good information to know, whether it was a source from the Appalachians or the Piedmont or from Georgia or wherever we moved it, the best one was still the best no matter where we put it. So we found no differences in survival, height, volume, from the Piedmont to the mountain. The other one, and Bill Hubbard put a great talk on about the Shortleaf website, and that was one of the key elements of our emphasis for shortleaf in North Carolina was there is a lack of knowledge, and where do you go find that knowledge? The universities aren't teaching it. Obviously, we're not managing a whole lot of shortleaf in North Carolina in particular. A lot of the information is from the western range, and it's good information. There's some old information in the eastern range, but you got to go to a lot of different places to find it. So the key to a lot of the initiatives is information, a central repository of this information. We were able to acquire a grant from the U.S. Forest Service, and part of our responsibility within that grant as North Carolina Forest Service was a decision support system. So a way to create this central repository of information, and we always intended it to be a website. We kind of sat with no one person able to take on such a daunting task. So we made the intelligent decision to hire some of the experts in Bill's group in the Southern Research Station Extension and contract them to put together a website, because they do a great job, as you all have seen on many other websites they've been a part of. So we like to think we were the catalyst for this effort, and kind of gave the framework for the website with what we had envisioned for it, with the different topics and the ability to print off a certain topic if you want to give that to a landowner or have it in your own files. And we're real proud of it, our part in that, and compliments to Holly and Daniel and Bill and all their staff that did that. And you need to go there and take advantage of it, because I think all the other initiatives in the South are going to be very jealous of this website. It's a model for what everybody else, for once, not everybody's not saying, well, we want to be like the Longleaf Alliance website. They're going to be saying we want to be like the Shortleaf Alliance or Initiative website. And I think that's a great success. So, what's the next step? Now, I don't have the great picture with the understory. So I feel like this was the champion tree in North Carolina back in the 30s or 40s. So, notice what I think is a degraded ecosystem already, that the hardwoods are already moving into what perhaps was a shortleaf. And maybe 50 years from now, that picture on your right will be the one that everybody will show at the conferences. So kind of like our next thought was we had these successes, but there's still some questions. And the primary question is, what do we want our forests to look like now? What's our desired future condition, as Martin pointed out? So we went back and I looked at this as Mattoon, and you see that the commercial area in the dark there is our Piedmont, where we have most of our shortleaf in 1915 and presently. But this is an interesting document from 1718, a map showing the grand Savannah of the Piedmont, a Savannah. And you hear some of the early explorers, I think Foote was one of them, that said, and he wrote this in 1780 something, that 200 years prior, the Piedmont in North Carolina was waving with grasses, and now it's a forest of trees. So the condition that we see now is kind of outlined in these natural communities that our natural heritage has defined. And you'll notice shortleaf isn't mentioned in any one of them as the predominant species, but it's a component in every one of them. So are we looking at a savanna, or are we looking at a mixed hardwood forest with pockets or glades of shortleaf, and shortleaf intermixed as a minor component? So I think that's an important first step in North Carolina to identify that desired future condition. And these are just some pictures of shortleaf that I know is in North Carolina, and one that's in Arkansas, if you can guess which one. But we've got pure stands of plantations. We're trying to go to the more savanna, shelterwood look, up in the mountains. It's a mixed thing. We've got some of those 4 pines, Jim, you talked about. You can stand on one site and there's 4 different southern yellow pines. The mixed hardwood, this lower picture there, that's a 105-year-old shortleaf. Obviously, it's in a mixed stand with predominantly a lot of white oak. And then the bottom right picture is from Arkansas. And so is that where we want to go, or similar to what we saw on the field trip yesterday? Timber production versus ecological restoration. I think that's going to be a talking point with foresters and landowners. All right, so this is, I got 3 slides, like my recipe for select strategies for restoration, and I'm going to hit these real quick, but we need to select the right sites. And so that's a little different in North Carolina than perhaps we see in Arkansas. Soils are very important. Moisture, drainage is very important. Topography isn't near as important. We don't have the east to west ridges. We don't have that real emphasized ridge and southern exposure in our Piedmont or even in our foothills. We also have that little leaf disease concern, and boy, that's a big one. We're just not sure where and how and how to deal with that. And then there's always the question of mixed stands. Is that the best way, or are pure stands the best way? For artificial regeneration, I'm preaching to the choir here. We're looking at, we know we need to do adequate site preparation and plant quality seedlings. And I think if we do that, we'll have success. Our nursery's gone over to containerized for shortleaf, and I think that's going to be a big plus for some success, because we've had some issues and some failures. And that may get back onto the issue of making putting it on the right site where it can be grown successfully. And then the mixed stands, important to match species. So if you're in a competitive situation, you need to be sure that the hardwoods that you're growing with your shortleaf are matching. I also like the idea that Jim Goulden has presented with longleaf. I think it'll work with shortleaf, that we have that component of shortleaf. It may not be a strong component. It's not a pure stand. Maybe it's not even enough for a Savannah at that low basal area. But we need to target our existing stands that have some shortleaf in it and take advantage of natural regeneration. I think there's plenty of landowners that if you put that option out to them, they would like that. And when you do that, natural regeneration in North Carolina is, I don't think it's as easy as what I saw on Bob Williams' slide. I don't think it's as easy as it is in Arkansas. The cone crops aren't near as frequent. We have to be real diligent on adequate site prep and timing. If we miss that timing window with the cone crop and we don't have the seed bed prepared, well, we're going to have the problem of lack of regeneration, and something else is going to take over. All right, so some of our lessons learned. We learned there's a lot of competition. And I'm not just talking competition in the woods, which there's a heck of a lot. Loblolly pine in particular, Virginia pine in particular, are very competitive, and we still haven't figured out how to keep them out of our shortleaf stands. But there's a competition for funding. So longleaf has a strong popularity, and they're getting a lot of grants. And so there's the competition for grants. There's a competition for interest and time. Probably not unlike myself, we have a shortleaf initiative, a longleaf initiative, a white cedar initiative, a spruce restoration initiative, and a cypress swamp bottomland initiative, and I think there's a bottomland hardwood initiative. So, you're getting pulled 6 ways with groups and partnerships, and which one is going to come up next? Hemlock's already there, one I forgot. And so there's a lot of interest and a lot of competition for your time and interest. But I mentioned this earlier, there is an interest in shortleaf pine, so that's a real plus. There's gaps in knowledge and experience. Talked about that already. And I'm really encouraged by the studies that Wayne's doing here at Tennessee. I know David Schnocke's doing several in North Carolina. That's bringing some more knowledge into the eastern realm that we can take advantage of and show people that research, that gap is hopefully narrowing a little bit. There are certainly real and perceived biases by the foresters in North Carolina. So one predominant forester with pest control called shortleaf pine beetle bait. Why would you ever want to plant it? So we have a beetle problem. And I perceive that it's a high-risk species for southern pine beetle. Little leaf disease risk is out there. The perception that it grows slowly, and that's a big disadvantage. We're not going to compete with loblolly pine. We know that. The cumulative peak for growth is 22 years age for loblolly pine and 42 years for shortleaf. So we've got to sell our tree as a long-term investment, a long rotation tree, and then sell the better quality timber, because early growth and that heavy juvenile wood 2x4 you're getting at Lowe's isn't going to be where we need to be for shortleaf. And then site suitability. We need to select the right site. This is just from one of the workshops, the most recent one in North Carolina. There's smoke management concerns. North Carolina is highly urbanized, especially in the Piedmont, where most of our shortleaf is. So we've got smoke management concerns and how to bring fire into the woods for shortleaf for any of our species. Shortleaf takes a little longer, a little better planning. Natural regeneration has not been dependable. Springleaf is not fireproof. We saw that in the good studies. There is the perception out there that shortleaf is a sprouter. And yeah, it sure is, but not all of them survive that top kill and sprout. And a lot of shortleaf does not sprout. Okay, so what's down the tracks for us in North Carolina? And this was a quote from Dr. Gary Blank at at our first meeting in 2005, and I just think it kind of poetically outlines the problem. It's an upland species without the production capacity of loblolly pine nor the ecological capacity of longleaf. So it seems unremarkable and therefore is expendable. And that's been the attitude, and I hope we're reversing that attitude. And I'll finish off with this slide. Shortleaf is the new longleaf. Mike Cheek, our assistant regional forester for forest management in our mountain region, which includes a big bulk of the Piedmont, quoted this, and I told him I was going to use it. But the rest of this I plagiarized off of Rhett Johnson with the Longleaf Alliance. He gave a talk at one of our white cedar conferences, because what's their lessons learned? And I think these are still valuable for shortleaf. We've got to include private landowners. The partnerships and the public lands, I think that's a good starting point that gets the interest going. But 76% of the land in North Carolina is privately owned. Private landowners got to be part of that partnership. I think you need to make an economic argument to complement your ecological. I think the good selling point for shortleaf is going to be ecological, but landowners need to have some source of income, and I think we have a strong timber product, and that can be done easily. We need to be honest brokers, so we can't oversell and lead to failures. We just need to be honest and present shortleaf as a good option. Maybe not to everybody, but it is a good option. And then, what's our hook? For longleaf, it was cultural, historical, ecological, threatened and endangered species, and we have some of those. But what in your area, what's the hook? And I found some landowners that just said, I'm tired of loblolly pine. I want something different, and I'm not interested in short rotation. I like wildlife, I like tradition. Shortleaf would fit in with that landowner. We need to educate. We need to demonstrate. I'm glad George is going to present a talk later on demonstration sites. And lastly, I agree. I think Martin already said this in his talk, or McCrae, or both. We need to be patient. We need to be patient in our restoration efforts, and we need to be patient with the initiative. It took the Longleaf Alliance 15 years before they saw one increase in acres. And so it may take Shortleaf that long, too, before we really get rolling. And with that, I'll say thank you for having me.